Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Hannah. Here we talk about books, chronic illness and life in Amsterdam. If you are new around here, this is my Radar series where I feature upcoming releases from indies and big presses, books that I'm excited about that you might be too, not necessarily a shopping list, but just putting them on your radar, as we say. So without further ado, I'll just jump straight in with some novels. Up first is The Ex-Wife by Ursula Parrott. This is part of the Faber edition series where they're republishing sort of lost or unknown or less, critically acclaimed in contemporary times novels, and people are finding it a really great way to discover new to them authors from previous eras. So this is a story about it says it's a witty one-liner stopping your track observations about romance, work, and life. I did not hate him anymore or love him or feel anything about him. I just felt tired. New York, 1924, Patricia and Peter are a thoroughly modern married couple. Both drink, both smoke, both work, both believe in love outside of marriage until they don't, or really, he doesn't. So when Peter pushes for divorce with increasing violence, Patricia has to forge a new life as a single woman, as an ex-wife. A sensational bestseller in the 1920s, it utterly timeless, has plunged us into the era of the one-night stand, evoking Manhattan bars, fashion advertising offices, female friendships, and all-night parties, as well as the hollow affairs, emotional hangovers, backstreet abortions, and struggle for sexual freedom in the moral double standards of the patriarchal world. I actually just read a novel about a horrible husband set now, and I think this is such an interesting read to read it in the 20s and know how many of these problems and, like it says, patriarchy still remains on top. So really intrigued to pick that one up. Okay, next up is one published by Grovic Atlantic, and this is Medusa of the Roses. This is a story set in Tehran, and it's a queer literary noir, it's described as. It says, Anjit and Zar are childhood best friends turned adults in love. The only problem is they live in Iran where being openly gay is criminalized, and the government's apparent acceptance of trans people requires them to surgically transition and pass as cis. When Zar is brutally attacked after being seen with a man in public, despite the betrayal, Anjar becomes more determined to carry out their long-standing plan for the future. Anjar, who's always identified with the mythical gender-changing Tisaras, I'm not sure I'm saying that right, will become a woman, and they'll move to a new town for a fresh start as husband and wife. But then Zal vanishes, leaving a cryptic note behind, which sets him on a quest to find the other man, hoping it will lead to Zal stalking and stealing his way through the streets, clubs, libraries, hotels, and museums of Tehran, where he encounters his troubled mother, addict brother, and the dynamic Leilal, a new friend who's undergoing a transition of her own. Soon they realize that someone is tailing them too. It quickly becomes more violent. More violence may be the fastest route to freedom, and his morals and gender identity are pushed to new places in the pursuit of love, peace, and self-determination. It says it uses Persian and Greek myth and poetic vulnerability. So it sounds like a complicated and brilliant story about sexual politics and gender and the sort of striving to be able to live as yourself in the country that you live in. So really fascinated by that one. Up next is Amphibian by Tyler Wetherall, published by Little Brown in the UK. This is a story set in the West Country, which is where my partner's from, so I'm always looking out for stories from there because they don't get written that often. But this is like a girlhood story of friendship and sort of like young, painful existence in small towns. It says, Sissy used to be on the outside, the new girl in her West Country school. She arrives with her troubled mother, prone to letting Sissy fend for herself. But from the day Sissy fights a boy in front of Tegan, she's no longer alone. Bonded by violence, they grow so close it feels like being one, wrapped up around each other, in bed at sleepovers, sending photos to men they meet online, and scaring each other with reports of the girls being snatched at night in their town. Over the course of the school year, they find themselves on the threshold of girlhood, with the threats gathering thick and fast around them. Their make-believe worlds blend into their daily lives, and she feels herself transforming into something strange and terrifying. I'm not always mad about child narrators, but I think obviously these themes of girlhood are coming up again and again in our popular media. And sorry if you can hear that. Hello, air ambulance. And I think when they're done right, like I'm thinking about Brutes I read, was that last year? They can be quite hypnotizing, I think. So intrigued by Amphibian. I really enjoy the photo on the cover. Another one with a girl in water on the cover. This is The Drownings, published by Headline, which I didn't read a lot from them, but this intrigued me because of watching a lot of swimming in the Olympics and the Paralympics. So this says, Serena arrives on campus reeling from an injury that destroyed her champion swimming career. She's lost until she meets Jane, an enigmatic tutor, obsessed with the historic witch trials that took place on Lasham's freezing waters. When several young women are assaulted, the university's shadowy legacy becomes inescapable. Those in power turn a blind eye, but Jane urges Serena and her friends to rise up, and their anger builds to an inferno of female rage. Serena takes matters into her own hands. In the waters, she can see what must be done and a sacrifice it will demand. Really enjoy witchy sprinkles in books. Hard to find ones that I really like, but like the concept I really enjoy. This reminds me, or it sounds like it might be a bit about, what is that? Is it Love and Virtue? By the Australian writer, which is also set in the university and deals with sort of sexual assault and violence. But I really like the idea of this history of the geography of the place they're in really creeping in on the contemporary reality. So that's The Drownings. Okay, Yoko Ogawa has a new book out which is set in the 1970s. Yoko Ogawa was previously nominated for the Booker Prize for their book, it's gone, can't remember. I have read a couple of, I think just one of their works before, and they also wrote that short story collection with the strawberry on the front. But this sounds really interesting. Obviously set in Japan, and this says, after the death of her father, 12-year-old Tomoko is sent to live for a year with her uncle in the coastal town of Ashiya. It is a year that will change her life. The 1970s are bringing changes to Japan, and her uncle's magnificent colonial mansion opens up a new and unfamiliar world to Tomoko. Its sprawling gardens are even home to a pygmy hippo, which you can see on the cover, which I'm obsessed with. The family keep as a pet. Tomoko finds her relatives equally exotic and beguiling, and her growing friendship with her cousin Mina draws her into an intoxicating world of secret crushes and elaborate storytelling. Rich with the myth and magic of youth, this is an evocative snapshot of a moment in time and a depiction of a family on the edge of collapse. Again, I think a book about girlhood and coming of age and those intense early friendships that a lot of us form when we're sort of finding our feet and finding ourselves. So also very intrigued by the phrase of like the family on the edge of the collapse could be like almost Family Saga-esque. So let me know if you've picked up Mina's Matchbox yet. We have a new book out from Claudia Pinheiro. She's returning back to her crime roots. This is Time of the Flies. Claudia Pinheiro wrote Eleanor Knows, from my all-time favourite books, Representation of Disability and Crypt Time. But yeah, this is returning back to her crime stories, which she, before publishing Eleanor Knows does have a crime element to it, but it's very literary. But she's renowned in Argentina, I think, for writing sort of popular crime novels. So this says, 15 years after killing her husband's lover, Inez is fresh out of prison and trying to put together a new life. Her old friend Mansa is out too, and they've started a business, FFF, Females Fumigation and Flies, dedicated to pest control and private investigation. By women, for women, but Senora Bonar, one of their clients, wants Inez to do more than kill bugs. She wants her expertise and criminal past to help kill her husband's lover too. Crimes against women versus crimes by women, culpability, fallibility, and our responsibilities to each other. This is Pinheiro at her right, earthy best, alive to all the ways we shape ourselves to be understandable, understood by family, love, and hostile forces. Pinheiro definitely writes with this popular tone of sort of feminist conviction is common in a lot of contemporary a lot of writers, a lot of female writers around there, but particularly there's this certain flavor of injustice that I feel the female writers out of South America come with to talk about things like femicide and violence against women, which is an epidemic in so many places, including where they're from. So yeah, I feel like she does it so well, and this sounds like funny and wry, but incredibly smart at the same time. So I think I'm going to pick this one up for my mum, because my friend just read it and said that she thinks my mum will like it. I feel like so many of my friends know my mum's book taste even without knowing her that well. So yeah, that one might be coming home with us soon. Okay, this one I was really intrigued by. This is Peggy by Rebecca Goffrey, partially also written by Leslie Jameson. I'm always interested in these collaborative book projects that are built often around sort of complicated circumstances, and this is one of them, because this is Rebecca Godfrey's final book that was completed by Leslie Jameson, because Godfrey died in 2022 before the book was finished, but I think she knew a lot about the book going on. And this is a novel, but it is a novelized memoir, or based on true history. Peggy is Peggy Guggenheim, which is a name you might be familiar with. So this says, Peggy Guggenheim, heiress and now legendary art collector in Venice, 1958, sits in the sun with her white marble palazzo on the Grand Canal. Hers has been a thrilling, near impossible journey. She's defied expectation, followed her heart, and found contentment. She's independent, original, and never stops believing in the power of art. She's 14 when her father dies on the Titanic, and her cloistered life is turned upside down. The youngest daughter of two Jewish dynasties, Peggy is determined to pursue a life of passion and freedom, but unexpected restrictions come with that vast fortune. As society changes and war sweeps through Europe, she navigates decadent, sexist, anti-Semitic art worlds of New York and Paris. She loves and is loved for herself and often for her money, but no one takes her intellect, vision, or time seriously until she believes it herself. So this sounds fantastic. If you are an arty person or know a lot, I don't know a lot about the Guggenheim family, but have visited, Guggenheim galleries. So I'm really intrigued to hear this history, and I think it might be one I would enjoy on audio. The translated novel I've heard a few whispers about is The Group. This is published by Black and White Publishing, who I'm not familiar with, but it's translated from the Spanish, and it says, when Hannah moves to Spain for an internship at the prestigious Prado Gallery, she finds herself spending days buried in the museum's startling archives and nights alone in her tiny rented flat. One day she sees Tom, Samuel, and Leah, glamorous and elegant foreigners in the city. Unlike her, they are fabulously wealthy, and their life is an endless whirlwind of creativity and hedonism. When Hannah discovers an uncatalogued 17th century etching, she makes the decision to change everything. From the sultry streets of Madrid to the gleaming world of Mediterranean luxury villas and exclusive parties, she gets closer to her deepest desire, and the stakes mount ever higher. The Group is a timeless story of a hidden identity and obsession. More so than I like books about visual art, I love books about the art world. Like Mouth to Mouth is one of my favourite art books, and I just read All That Glitters earlier this summer, which is a non-fiction book about like art fraud and art heists, and I think sort of like climbing the greasy art pole is a very interesting underworld of like money and often linked to crime and like all these types of flashy people. I think it says a lot about us as a society. So this one really caught my eye. Okay, another piece of translated fiction. This is I Will Live, published by Little Brown on the 22nd of August. Says Busra is living a double life. At home with her parents, life is an endless argument about what time she comes home, what she wears, and above all, how the rules apply to her while her brother enjoys free reign. But out in the world, things are different. She's studying Dutch literature at university and reads everything she can get her hands on. She works in a restaurant where she wears tight dresses and serves alcohol, and her biggest secret is always she has a boyfriend she is passionately and sinfully in love with. It's a rallying cry against patriarchal justice and the story of a young woman finding her voice. This sounds fabulous. And again, lots of themes of patriarchy coming up. Female rage, I think, is a big theme this summer. But yeah, next up I have Mamil by Gemma Reeves. Really enjoy the cover of this, particularly the green. This is published on the 1st by Borough Press. This sounds like it could be a real complicated mother-daughter dynamic, which is a story I love to read. And this is set in Broadstairs, which is also like a place you don't often hear written about. This says, is it Edie or Eddie? Edie lives with her partner Joanna in a crumbling country house in Broadstairs. They've lived there over a decade since the death of Harry, the third member of their polyamorous relationship. It's a quiet and comfortable existence, but the conversations about the mother who abandoned her have awoken feelings in Edie she's long buried. It's a stylish and searing drama about complicated love of mothers and daughters, the indelible impact of estrangement, and a woman coming into her own. I think it's meant to be written quite poetically, sort of in vignette style, perhaps. And it's described as haunting and seductive. So I think the setting could be very atmospheric, perhaps an autumnal pick. Okay, something a little more thrilling, which sometimes I'm in the mood for. This one, I think is, this is published by Random House. It's called The Most, if I didn't say that already, sorry. It says, a warm Sunday in November 1957, as Sputnik 2 orbits the Earth carrying Linka, the doomed Soviet dog, a couple begin their day. Virgil Becker is an insurance salesman, and he isn't particularly happy in his job, but he fulfills the role, playing golf with the partners, drinking at the bar, chasing the women. And Kathleen, once a promising tennis champion with a key shot up her sleeve called The Most, is now a mother and a homemaker. Somehow these two have been together since college and have fallen into the roles expected to them, the prescribed suburban dream they've been sold as something to covet. But this unseasonably warm early November, Kathleen wakes up and decides she will not accompany her family to church. No, she feels like a swim. She unearths her old red bathing suit, descends into the apartment complex pool no other residents use, and she doesn't want to come out. So this blurb leaves sort of very more questions than answers, I think, about the concept. Is she dead in the pool? Is she sort of entering another life? Is she running away from her family? It says it's a consuming tale about 1950s tightly wound American housewives, and it's comped to Jonathan Franzen, and I do like myself a bit of Franzen sometimes. So interested in the setting and the era, and again, patriarchy, men, heteronormative marriages, failing women. Could be great. Okay, this one I've already read, and I can tell you it's brilliant. This is Liars by Sarah Mangusto, published by Picador. This, when I tell you, my blood was boiling when I read this book. This is an unflinching, grim, raw depiction of toxic men who have no idea how good they have it. It's about a woman who's an artist. As when Jane, an aspiring writer, meets John, a filmmaker, they want the same things: to be in love, to be successful, have a creative life, and be happy. When they marry, she believes she's found everything she's looking for, all the attendant joys and labour of motherhood. But it's not long until she finds herself subsumed by John's ambitions, whim, and ego. In short, she just becomes a wife. This is a short book, and I think if it was any longer, I would have had to have thrown my Kobo across the room, because it is an infuriating read. The entitlement, the slow violence of this man, and how much he deeply disrespects his wife. Awful. The institution of marriage, the failure of sort of patriarchal society, just so many lessons in this book. It was really weird to read this just after I got engaged. I was like, is the institution of marriage just deeply corrupt and nothing I want to be involved in? Who's to say? Okay, on to some short stories. This is Lessons from Cruising by Martin Goodman. I love the cover of this. It's published by The Barbican, who put out some really great titles. It says, meet his cast of characters. Joy, this is Joy, Wild and Gay Stories. The cast of characters: New York designer Arnold, whose his lovely life blossoms from age 7. We watch him grow famous and learn the bumps of his life. A young priest who leaves uptight England to find himself in Turkey. Queenie, scarred from her time as a beautiful boy, meets young Tom, who loves the fact she's a wreck. A young Indian teacher meets a London billionaire who's not yet out. And a stunning finale is the gay version of Melville's classic Billy Budd, A Story of a Doomed Sailor. So yeah, lots of different characters and stories to be told here, all around the idea of queerness. Sounds like it could be brilliant. Up next is Mothballs, which is a graphic novel, but like with a literary spin. It looks like published by Fantagraphic Books. This says, Buenos Aires 2001, when Vilma passes away, few friends and relatives care to attend her funeral. In his conspicuous absence sparks the curiosity of her 19-year-old granddaughter, who moves into the house her grandmother left her, a house haunted by memories, and she dives into her life to uncover a family history shrouded in tragedy. Moving seamlessly between Italy at the start of the 20th century and Argentina at the beginning of the 21st, this draws a poetic comparison between granddaughter and grandmother, women who are strong-willed and ambitious, eager to forge their own way, but face pressure from family to conform to the path set for them. At a crossroads of her own life, knowing well the isolation her grandmother felt, she wants to break free from this chain of history. Here we chronicle the family dynamics with rare nuance and sensitivity, tenderness and whimsy amid the pain, to show Tour de France cartooning the marks that Soul or Terror is a major talent in the comic scene. This sounds wonderful, and I think it's so rare to find graphic novels that really appeal to me, that sort of step out of the convention of the very specific genres that we see in this form of comic. But this sounds so beautiful, and I really hope I can acquire a copy on a digital copy somehow. Okay, on to some non-fiction. This is 20 Years, Hope, War and the Betrayal of an Afghan Generation, published by FSG in the States. This is a history of the Afghan War, essentially. So it says, no country was more affected by 9/11 than Afghanistan, a generation who grew up with the upheaval that began that day. Young Afghans knew the promise of freedom and democracy, fought each other over its meaning, and then witnessed its collapse. Wall Street Journal correspondent Soon Engel Rasmussen draws on more of a decade of reporting from the country to tell Afghanistan's story from a new angle. The eyes of deeply empowered new women, skilled entrepreneurs, driven insurgents, and abandoned Western allies. We see the US and its partners bring freedom and wealth to preside over corruption, warlordism, social division that led to the Taliban's return to power. So I think this does it through a social history following specific characters, people. It says Zara, who returned from abroad with high hopes for a liberated country to fight to escape a brutal marriage, and Omari, who joins the Taliban to protect the honor of his village. And we see these different stories emerge to tell that social history through these personal lenses, which I always find really enlightening. So that's 20 Years. Okay, a queer non-fiction book out with Unbound. This is Queer as Folklore, the hidden queer history of myths and monsters. Kind of explains itself, but this says, Sasha Cowd will take you on a wild ride through the night from ancient Greece to RuPaul's Drag Race, visiting cross-dressing pirates, radical fairies, and the graves of the queerly departed on the way. Queer communities have always sought refuge in the shadows, found kinship in the in-between, and created safe space in the underworld, but these forgotten narratives tell a story of resistance that deserves to be heard. So that sounds brilliant. Okay, a new book out from Sarah Moss, whose fiction books I love, and also her non-fiction book she wrote previously about moving to Iceland with young children, is a book I always recommend to people. And this is My Good Bright Wolf, a memoir. I did start to read this, actually. I have a proof of it, but I didn't quite get on board with the writing style. It was very cerebral, and I was not feeling well at the time, so it wasn't the right choice, but I will be coming back to it. It says, in the household of Sarah Moss, she learnt the female body and mind were battlegrounds. 1970s austerity and second wave feminism taught her she must keep herself slim but never vain, intelligent but never angry, cook and sew, make do and mend, but know those skills are still frivolous. Girls should be ambitious, but women must restrain themselves. Women must stay small. Years later, self-control became dangerous and Sarah found herself in A&E. The return of her teenage anorexia had become a medical emergency. She had to reckon with all she had denied, from her hard-working body and furiously turning mind. So this says it can look to the contested memories of girlhood, the chorus of relentless and controlling voices, beautiful, audacious, and moving. So yeah, I think she writes such compelling, uncomplicated stories for us, and uncomplicated is a compliment. I think she really strips away and makes every word count in her writing, and I think this will be no different. I think the lighting might just have changed because I'm filming in the early evening. So apologies for that. Up next is Home is Where We Start, Growing Out in the Fallout of the Utopian Dream by Susanna Crossman. Been waiting for this book to come out for so long. I follow Susanna on Instagram. I've been keeping up with her writing updates. And this is sort of cult adjacent, I would say. It says, in the turbulent late 70s, 6-year-old Susanna moved with her mother and siblings from a suburban Tellis to a crumbling mansion in the English countryside. They shared their new home with over 50 residents from around the world, armed with warm paperbacks on ecology, Marxism, and radical feminism, with the utopian dream of remaking the world. They did not leave for another 15 years. While adults adopted new names and liberated themselves from domestic roles, the kids ran free. In the community, no one was too young to discuss nuclear war, and children learnt not to expect white noses or regular bedtimes. Instead, they made a home in a house with no locks or keys, never knowing when they opened the door whether they'd find violent political debates or a couple writhing under the sheets. Crossman here, decades later, revisits her past, looking to leading thinkers in philosophy, sociology, and anthropology to discover the society that she really grew up in, the many meanings of family and home, to ask herself what happened to the children who were raised in the products of these social experiments, and how growing up estranged from the outside world shapes her life as a parent today. I think that sounds fascinating. And you hear stories and have read articles about people who grew up in these kinds of communal living situations in various parts of the UK countryside, and I'm sure it's the same in lots of other countries as well. And this sounds fascinating. And I obviously, if you watched my holiday video, I read a cult book of a similar kind of setup as this. So intrigued to see what she has to say about that. Okay, this is a memoir on childhood trauma called The End of Tennessee, published by an indie in the States, University of South Carolina Press. And this says, not a year before I ran away from home at 17, I stepped out of the house at dusk, able to see the shrub oats thinned out for winter, famed flower too. Dung clay was so soft it smelt like the smelt settled in my skin. And so begins Rachel's debut memoir about growing up impoverished, uneducated, and surrounded by violence. In these lyrical and fragmented prose, she lays bare the impossible choice between self-preservation and the love for 5 younger siblings. She had become their second mother. As time passed, she struggled with the guilt of leaving her siblings, but she realised she could not save them. This is a testament to a sister's love, a book for anyone who's left one life to create another. It sounds like it might be pretty harrowing, but also with a poetic tone, and lyrical fragmented prose always do something for me, so that one sounds great. Okay, something a little more lighthearted. This is Wanted, Toddlers' Personal Assistant, how nannying for the 1% taught me about the myths of equality, motherhood, and upward mobility in America. I rarely see non-fiction books that really talk about nannying and like that whole industry in a way that's like engaging in socioeconomic issues. This says, what are the lives of the richest American families really like? Their nannies see it all. I worked as a nanny for a couple of years, not for incredibly rich people, just like standard wealthy Londoners. But I had a friend who nannied definitely for the 1% and was like trained at one of those nanny schools, and she had some stories, so I'm interested in this. This says, when Stephanie moves to New York after college to pursue a career in writing, she realizes her entry-level salary won't cover that high cost of living, never mind the crushing student loan debt. But there's one in-demand job that pays more than enough to allow Stephanie to stay in the city, nannying for the 1%. Desperate to escape the poverty of her own childhood and jump social classes, she falls into a job that hijacks her life for the next 7 years, an assistant to toddlers of Manhattan's Upper East Side. It seems like the perfect solution. It covers her bills, and she's surprised by how attached she becomes, this is for sure, to the kids, even gasps over Prada baby onesies and preschools that cost more than her college tuition. But the 12-hour days leave her little time to see her friends, date, or pursue those creative projects that might lead to that prestigious career. The shiny allure of a glamorous job begins to dull. She understands what happens behind the doors of those Park Avenue apartments, and money doesn't guarantee happiness. A poignant and funny portrait of Americans struggling to find work they love, balanced against the headwinds of global uncertainty, chronicling her life as a newbie nanny to a beloved caregiver and the painful decision to say goodbye to the children she has grown to love. So yeah, I think this sounds so fascinating, but also like probably has some great witty and fun one-liners in it too. Also, speaking of children, this is A Measure of Intelligence, A Mother's Reckoning with the IQ Test by Pepper Stelter, published by Diversion Books. This is such a unique context, I think, but again is using that personal lens to inspect something that's really important. This says, when Pepper discovers that her daughter Louisa, who has Down syndrome, would regularly be required to take IQ tests to secure support at school, she asks the question, why? In questioning the authority and relevance of the test, she sets herself on a winding and dark investigation into how the IQ test came to be with the irrefutable standard for measuring intelligence. The unsettling history causes her to wonder what the influence this test will have over her daughter's future, and if Genesis is so marred in eugenics, whether Louisa should be taking it at all. What are we measuring when we measure intelligence? She discovers the history of IQ, its roots in eugenics, racism, xenophobia, and ableism. She discovers a desire to quantify intelligence is tied to a desire to segregate society, that's for sure. And she traces its legacy from its inception to the present day, where school and society have adopted IQ as a shorthand for individuals' aptitude, in essence, their worth. She questions this rigid definition of intelligence and who society uses to uphold as successful. So this says it looks at her mother's love for her daughter in incisive and cultural analysis. So such an interesting combination of context there, and something that's deeply important to write about. And I think lots of people don't know about the history of things like IQ and personality tests and their roots in eugenics and Nazism and all these sort of painful and abhorrent histories. But like it says, we use them as shorthand day to day to discuss things like aptitude. So that is a measure of intelligence. Okay, a fun-ish, I think. It sounds fun to me, kind of white-collar crime type of book, which I often feature in these radar videos, so I do quite enjoy reading them. This is Never Saw Me Coming by Tanya Smith. How I outsmarted the FBI and the whole banking system to pocket 40 million. A true story of a middle-class black girl from Minneapolis became one of the single biggest threats to the US banking system. Tanya Smith fancies herself a folk hero, a Robin Hood, her powers of persuasion to buck the system and help the poor. It started innocently enough with calls to celebrity houses with her twin sister. Soon she realised she could convince utility companies to amend the balances of her friends and neighbours, clearing their overdue bills with a single phone call. Eventually, she tested the limits and realised she could really get past any gatekeeper and understood what money can do. Over the years, Tanya confiscated 40 million in cash and commodities from US banks, hacked wire transfers, and it didn't take long before the FBI was on her trail. But when interviewing her, they made it clear they were just using her to get to the person who they thought was actually running things. Clearly, she wasn't smart enough to do this alone. Thus became this cat and mouse game where the authorities would drive to unthinkable limits, breaking the hearts of her parents and putting Tanya's life in jeopardy before sending her to prison, where she escaped twice and the longest sentence given for a white-collar crime. So yeah, I think this sounds so interesting and kind of one of those non-fiction books that reads like a thriller, very bad blood-esque. So it could be a really great audio read for me. Okay, back on the topic of patriarchy and motherhood, this is Mother State, A Political History by Helen Charman, published by Penguin. I've heard lots of people already talking about this book, lots of writers that I admire and enjoy. So this says, this is a level of study undergone by Charman which draws crucial new perspective on the institutions of the UK that have classified motherhood as morally and socially fertile for both symbolic rendering and systemic economic construction. As the state continues to contrive damaging figures of motherhood, this book entirely evidences contrary models and resists bad mythologies. All of the narratives, documents, testimonies, and policies reviewed here are articulated brilliantly with expert understanding, ensuring the personal as political ethic contract that drives our feminist writing. So I think this sounds like it's going to be so brilliant. It says, it tells the story of what motherhood has been from the 1970s and what it could be right now and in the future, using provocative insight to write a history of Britain and Northern Ireland, beginning with the women's liberation and ending in austerity. So really like, especially a British-centric non-fiction book about motherhood. I know we've had lots of these books come out in the US in recent years, but this one sounds very sort of politically engaged and important. Here's You're Embarrassing Yourself, which can we take a minute for the cover and the colours on here. Amazing. Published by Fourth Estate. Writer, actor and director Desiree shares her stories that she was told to shut up about, hilarious, horny, and heartbreaking. When it comes to shame, she knows what she's talking about, whether winning the title of ugliest girl at her high school, acquiescing to the nose job she was forced on by her Iranian parents, or losing her virginity to a coat host she met in a support group for cutters. This goes to the rawest places, a lifelong struggle of peace, for a search for your body, for a home as a child of immigrants, and an anxious underbelly of artistic ambition, compared to Gia Tolentino and Jeanette McCurdy. Okay, this one sounds like soft and gentle and really beautiful. This is a memoir called Group Living and Other Recipes. It sounds a little bit perhaps like my friend Rebecca's book, in talking about food, but food as joy, food as like political engagement, food as all these other things. It says, Lola grew up in the 90s in the iconoclastic, I cannot say that, hippies. Her mum is energetic and intense at work and play, whether her job for a marketing and agricultural co-op or paddling down the river, fat split in hand. Has spent her life revolting against her American and Filipino upbringing. Her dad is the child of an Eastern Oregon desert, a jovial documentary filmmaker who loved to collect. A filmmaker and historian, both threw open the doors to Holman House, their rambling home in Portland, Oregon, to long-term visitors and unusual guests in need of a place to stay. Years later, after college and her parents' separation, Lola returned home. She joined her brother and his housemates, an eclectic group of non-stop motion animators and accomplished cooks, choosing to experiment with communal living in a future generation. This tells the story of the residents of the Holman house, the transcendent meals and ecstatic parties, colourful characters, tenderness, irritation, and a shared life that's appealing and just maybe utopian. Looking at group living and cooking as a way of life, from spending time with her aunts and uncles' intentional community in Washington and finding her footing as a student in Japan in a kitchen with her host family, to mushroom hunting in the Pacific Northwest, a reevaluation of the structures that center our lives. So yeah, fascinated by this living and cooking and communal life that Lola's talking about. And I saw this one pop up on my audio app, so I will be listening pretty soon. Okay, and finally, this is Man Boobs, and the subtitle is A Very Queer Memoir. This is published by Random House, published by Random House in the UK on the 8th, and this is a coming of age story. It says, even as a young child in Lahore, Komal knew he was different. Other boys didn't pirouette off their desk, get bullied for their man boobs, or spontaneously burst out into song from The Little Mermaid. Other boys didn't play like that. Starved of a crucial part of himself, he ate, and before long his body became another burden to carry and hide. Komal began to believe his only chance at a happy life was found elsewhere in America, land of the free and home of the gays. But he would soon find out that happiness took a lot more than a plane ticket. This is a riotous, intelligent memoir looking for a place between two worlds, the minefield of expectation, prejudice, and self-doubt. Here, Komal announces himself as a sharp new voice with humour and a moving, wickedly fun search, the bravery required to find yourself. So yeah, I think that sounds beautiful. It's got all 5-star ratings so far on NetGalley. So that is the final book I had to tell you about in the August radar. Let me know if any of these are on your radar. If you're planning to read any of them, I would love to hear from you. And if not, I'll catch you in the next video. Bye.